Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that gives you the secret histories and little-known, fascinating facts and figures behind your favorite movies, TV shows, music, and more. We are your two guitar techs of triviality. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh.
Jordan, today we're going to be talking about one of the all-time greatest debut records, a true dirtbag magnum opus that captured the nexus of the Los Angeles glam metal and hard rock scenes, minted both one of the all-time guitar heroes and genius/madman lead singers of all time. That's right, we are talking about Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, which turned 35 this year or 35 last year?
35 this year.
Turned 35 this year. Recorded.
I think this week.
This week. Wow.
I believe so, yeah.
Holy shit. It's older than all of the women they used to date. Jordan, I am guessing by what I know about you that this album is something of a blind spot for you.
That is true. I am more a fan of crooner Richard Cheese's lounge versions of these songs on his album, Apparatif for Destruction, which is very good. He has an incredible version of Welcome to the Jungle. You should all check it out.
I'll give him that title. That's good.
Yeah. Aperitif for Destruction is really good. But yes, you've correctly noted that I am not the world's biggest GNR expert. My main memory of Axl Rose was basically just being frightened of him whenever I saw him on TV as a child.
Yeah.
And just making those sounds like a strung out cat getting electrocuted.
It's like Bobcat Goldthwait and Robert Plant.
Yes. I mean, for me, Guns N' Roses came at a funny period when I was getting into music in the mid-90s, because by that point, they were sort of already past it. And, you know, Axl already kicked everyone out from the classic lineup, and he was sinking into his 15-year Chinese democracy saga. So they didn't have anything new. Then their old stuff wasn't old enough to be considered classic yet, at least to me. I don't know. In the mid-90s, to me, it just seemed old. It just seemed, I remember in the 90s thinking that all hair metal stuff just kind of seemed like,
I mean,
you know, up there with like disco stuff. Like
I take umbrage with calling, I don't think they're hair metal.
You're right. As I said, I am far from a Guns N' Roses
It's a useless genre distinction, but I don't know, man. I heard these songs on like 93.5, The Rock of Central PA, like constantly growing up. But we've talked about how formative VH1 was for both of us growing up and watching like the countdown
50 most shocking moments in rock.
Yeah, or even, I mean, for me, it was more the 100 greatest artists of hard rock, starring Carmen Electra in a leather dress. But yeah, man, everything is like Axl fights a security guard. Axl spent 30 years making Chinese democracy. Axl this, Axl that. And yeah, I agree with you.
Slash's heart stopped for 8 minutes.
Yeah. Well, that was Nikki Sixx, I think. But yeah,
no, it was Axl. It was Slash too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, maybe it was like a heart stop race.
The arms race of LA hard rock was seeing who could die for the longest time. And yet none of them did. I was never really a GNR fan. I have to tread carefully because my wife was in a GNR cover band 2 years running in which she played Axl.
Oh, what were they called?
It was, oh God,
there better be a pun or else I'm going to be really mad.
Buns and Posers.
Oh, that's good.
That's medium funny.
Yeah.
But they played Hanks, and I was in the bathroom, and I heard this dude talking to his buddy, and he was like, that was honestly probably better than when I saw them in the late 90s. So she's a big Axl fan.
I mean, having heard her sing, I can buy that, yes.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I went back and listened to it, and I was like, these songs slap. I never want to hear them again. So thank what I assume is an iHeart station, 93.5 The Rock in Central PA, for overplaying the shit out of them to me. Anyway, from the band's disgusting pre- and post-fame lives in LA and the city's gutters, to the record's original, extremely messed up artwork, to the time GNR had a cameo in the fifth and final Dirty Harry film, here's everything you didn't know about Appetite for Destruction. By the mid-'80s, LA was fully in the grips of the hair glam metal revolution. You have Quiet Riot's Metal Health, which is the one with Come Feel the Noise.
Oh, the Slade cover, yeah.
Yeah. That came out in 83. And then also that year, Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil. Shout! You know that song. Shout at the devil! Yeah.
Just because I don't react doesn't mean I don't know it. It just means I don't like it.
I'm just going to keep throwing hair metal impressions at you, see what you get. Def Leppard's Pyromania, our first Robert John Mutt Lange reference. So yeah, so all three of those come out in 83, and they are hits. And it cements the commercial viability of this semi-mutant strain of hard rock that evolved out of this generation of bands absorbing the first wave of this gender-bending glam rock, T-Rex, New York Dolls, David Bowie, and their harder-edged contemporaries, still hooky, still jammed with hooks, like Alice Cooper, Kiss, and Van Halen. Slash actually goes on to play one of the Les Pauls that belonged to Alice Cooper guitarist Steve Hunter, which is funny. Yeah, I think it was Nikki Sixx, actually, maybe talking to Klosterman, talking to someone who's like, our biggest influence is Aerosmith. Like, all those guys loved Aerosmith. That was like a huge thing for them. But the genre at that point had yet to calcify into the what we call pop metal, stuff like Poison, Bon Jovi, or Aerosmith once they meet Diane Warren and start cranking out MOR garbage, starring his underage daughter in all the music videos. Slash has a tremendous quote about this. We hated Poison so much that we just spent a lot of time touring around the different clubs in Los Angeles just to blow Poison's doors off.
Just to steal their audience.
Yeah. The other thing is, this is like not yet even 10 years removed from the first wave of LA punk. So like some of these guys were dangerous and gross. I mean, this is around the Whiskey A Go-Go. This is around Gazaris, the Rainbow. I mean, it is just a bunch of young, drunk dudes with chips on their shoulders with loud guitars. And it kind of rules. Mark Cantor is a guy who grew up with Slash and wrote the definitive book about this record, Reckless Road, Guns N' Roses, and the Making of Appetite for Destruction.
He's the son of the owners of Cantor's Deli, an LA institution. And you go in there and there's pictures of Guns N' Roses all over the wall.
Axl is suing them as we speak.
Is he?
No. He's very litigious. He explained, Los Angeles in the mid-'80s seemed to be a place where anybody across the country could just drop themselves off on a Greyhound bus and go through the channels to see what they could become. You're in the middle of the Sunset Strip, and between the Troubadour, the Roxy, and the Rainbow, you meet people who are there to get a band together and play, especially at the Rainbow. The Rainbow is the biggest turning point for all the bands. That's where they ate, hung out, and where most of the connections were made. There was a lot of band hopping going on. It was like a meat market for musicians.
But as you said, this was a rough scene, and these guys were so poor. It's really sad. They lived like 4 to a room or with people's parents. Axl worked at the Tower Records on Sunset, and he would sleep in the parking lot under the stairs after the store closed. He showered at a local gym, and once this is like Dickensian meets Sunset Strip, I guess.
It's like if the Rolling Stones grew up in David Copperfield.
Right. Once the band split a single cheeseburger 5 ways. That makes me really sad. Oh,
I think the quote in the Cantor book is that at the time, the one guy, he was talking to the one guy, he aspired to shower at a gym. He was trying to get a gym.
Oh, so he didn't actually shower at a gym. He wished he could.
Yeah, he was like, I got to get a membership to a gym so I could shower there. It was an aspiration for him.
And so many of these bands on the scenes were looked after with the local strippers on the scene who were basically like den mothers to whoever their current boyfriend and the boyfriend's bands were at the time. Slash later told Rolling Stone in 2007, strippers were our main source of income. One of the places that Axl and his friends lived didn't even have a toilet. Which somehow, that seems just like maybe number 1 on the list of essentials you need in a
You've not fulfilled
domicile.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs without a toilet.
Although Slash did later go on to say it wasn't like we actually like lived there. He said, I can't remember one night that we actually slept quietly there. Like, good night, Axl, good night, Slash. It was more like that's where our stuff was and that's where you could pass out.
I like to imagine Guns N' Roses doing the bit from the Waltons. Good night, Slash. Good night, Axl. Good night, Duff. Good night, Matt. And then they all like pull their needles out of their arms at the same time. Without getting too, I say this every episode and then I proceed to do exactly that. But without getting too granular about the roots of the LA hard rock scene at the time, two bands formed Guns N' Roses, Hollywood Rose and LA Guns, which you may be picking up on a theme. Hollywood Rose guitarist, guy named Chris Webber, met the other guitarist in the non-Slash guitarist in GNR, Izzy Stradlin, in the parking lot of the Rainbow Bar and Grill via LA Guns' Tracy Guns. Slash joins the band, and so does GNR drummer Steven Adler. That band breaks up, and then Axl joins LA Gun, while Slash fails an audition for Poison, or at least auditioned successfully, and they decided to go with CC DeVille.
Which I can think we all could admit is probably for the best.
Yeah, for all parties involved. And then Hollywood Rose merges with LA Guns in March 1985, forming Guns N' Roses. There's a bunch of guys in this band, including Tracy Guns, but they all get kind of replaced, including Seattle transplant Duff McKagan, who is now like a fucking crazy rich dude because he invested in Amazon early on. He like got sober and then like went back and got his MBA and is now like richer than those other dudes by an order of magnitude because he made a bunch of savvy business decisions.
I read that he had like serious cred with his friends in Seattle because he met Joe Strummer as a kid.
Yeah, he was a big punk rock kid. He was like in on the ground floor in punk rock. He also, if memory serves, has one of the more disgusting stories where his like pancreas was blowing up and they had to like cut a hole in his side to release like the heat and gases that were being formed by his combusting organ. Otherwise, he would have actually exploded from within. Anyway, that's fun.
They warned us about pop rocks, but
as will become a theme, Tracy Guns explained in a 2019 interview, Axl got into an argument with our manager and our manager fired him, but we all lived together, so it was really weird. So that same night he got fired, we started Guns N' Roses, and I called Izzy the next day and said, hey, we're going to start this new band. Do you want in? Rejected early names for the band included Heads of Amazon. Sure.
Well, considering Duff's future, that's very...
Yeah. And AIDS.
Oh.
Yeah.
No.
Anyway, so that's already, we're already establishing two of the running themes in Guns N' Roses, which is Axl getting in fights and things that are in poor taste for 400, Alex. The band very quickly got to work. They played their first show after 2 days of rehearsals in June of 85. And then 2 days after that, they embark on a West Coast tour. They hit Sacramento, Portland, Eugene, Seattle, and San Francisco, booked by Duff via his old connections from the punk rock days. Accounts differ as to whether or not they had an Oldsmobile or a Pontiac, but they also had a U-Haul. The transmission died on the car, and the band pulled all their guitars out, leaves the rest of their gear, and they hitchhiked up to Seattle, occasionally, whimsically, as Slash recalls, making forays into local farms and stealing like onions and carrots from the fields so that they could eat. Anyway, that tour, they called it the Hell Tour, and everyone is like, that was our moment. We like bonded, forged in fire, bonded in blood. And so when they get back to LA, they set up in a shared living space rehearsal spot, and they were disgusting, gross men. Izzy was dealing heroin, and their appetite, if you will, quickly became legendary.
They were signed to Geffen Records by an A&R man named Tom Zutaut, who, in an interview with Loudwire in 2021, said, no amount of alcohol or drugs will slow them down. Guns N' Roses were able to consume those things, yet deliver a live show and deliver in the studio. And our friend Mark Cantor added, Slash was like a monster. You could put 2 bottles of booze in him and put a blindfold around him, and he would still come out and play his part perfectly. And Zutaut actually knew quite a bit about heroic substance intake. He was the guy who signed Motley Crue to Elektra. So he knew what he was talking about. But Guns N' Roses maybe have Motley Crue beat. We mentioned this at the top of the episode. There's the time that Slash overdosed on a speedball at a hotel in 1992. I think it was in San Francisco, and was declared legally dead for 8 minutes, which is impressive because I had heard that brain damage starts at around 5 minutes of lack of oxygen to the brain.
No one said it.
Be nice.
No one said it didn't start.
Oh.
They just said he came back.
He later told The Guardian, these drug dealers came to my hotel room at 5 a.m. They had everything, and I took all of it. I started down the hallway, and I ran into a maid, and I asked her where the elevator was, and then bam, I collapsed. There's a thing that happens when paramedics wake you up out of death like that, where it's just like this huge shock of energy and lights, voices and pandemonium, and an unmistakable feeling. I've had it a few times, and I remember that.
That is not even his only overdose story in this episode.
Yes. I actually my heart stopped when I was born. I was a preemie and I had a respiratory distress syndrome. My heart stopped for like 5 to 8 minutes too, and they're worried about brain damage.
Did you come out with a little top hat and a Les Paul?
No, but I came out with this weird fixation on researching pop culture things.
Anyway, the band plays a show at the Troubadour in February of 86, and Zutto is in attendance, and that is the show that convinces him to sign them, and he was not alone. They covered Gimme Shelter and Heartbreak Hotel, which was their encore for a long time, which I find really adorable. That book is incredible. It has all these early photos of them. It has like their little handwritten set lists that have like the stage.
Is this the Cantor one?
Yeah, they have the stage cues on them. Like it says like welcome to the jungle, like fog. And then like Paradise City, like light show, and then it's really cute. Yeah, so
like Mr. Brownstone.
We all
Slash
shoot
falls
up.
over.
Yeah. Zutto said there were 5 or 6 A&R people lined up in the same spot. It was literally the loudest show I had ever seen in an LA club. But the band did not sign right away and took a great amount of pleasure allowing themselves to get the proverbial wine and dine from every single other A&R person in LA.
But they do eventually sign with Geffen in March of 1986, pulling a $75,000 advance after turning down one almost double from Chrysalis Records. But Geffen crucially offered them creative control, and Chrysalis wanted to tinker with their sounds, so that was that. Zutto paid producer Spencer Proofer $15,000 to record Night Train and Sweet Child of Mine, basically as a demo test. And a former Guns N' Roses roadie, a guy named Ron Schneider, explained the genesis of the title Night Train. He said, Night Train was the cheapest, nastiest bottle of wine you could buy. We could never afford fifths of Jim Beam or Jack Daniels, just Night Train. Oh. And Cantor later told Loudwire, Guns N' Roses recorded those songs in 2 or 3 weeks at a time when they were totally out of control. Even Axl wasn't in the best shape, and he was the cleanest out of all of them. But he was fooling around with whatever they were doing. Once he saw that they were totally spun out, he just stopped. But nobody showed up to the sessions on time. They'd throw up or pass out in the studio, but they got the songs done.
Consummate professionals all. Proffer tells his version of this is messed up. His kid was born about this time. He wanted to be with his family, his wife and newborn child. And so he basically offered to, if I'm remembering correctly, split like a day with the band. He was like, I'll give you guys 5 hours and then I'm going home to spend time with my kid. And he says the band all rolled into the studio as one. Slash peed on the wall, and Axl threw up on the control board and asked him if he wanted to party. And he was like, no, I want to record you guys, and then I want to go home and be with my newborn child. And Axl then told him that he could either work with Guns N' Roses or be a dad, but not both. And he called up Zutto and the label and quit. Slash's quote, I don't recall any of that.
Which makes sense.
Or else I didn't know about it and Tom didn't tell us. That's a possibility. All right, I don't want to short sell the rest of the band here, especially Duff, tremendous bassist. Go listen to was it Paradise City that has that crazy, it's almost like gospel bass at the end. Anyway, and they also wrote a lot of this material collectively, which is interesting considering how it sort of becomes the Axl show later on. But it is hard to argue that when you think of GNR, you basically think of Axl and Slash. Axl was born William Bruce Rose Jr. in Lafayette, Indiana, and his early life sucked. He was an unplanned pregnancy. His parents separated when he was around 2. His biological father allegedly abducted and molested him before skipping town and was later murdered.
Wow. Supposedly, this was the root of his beef with Slash in later years. Slash went on to work with Michael Jackson on the 1991 song Give In To Me, and I think also performed at a tribute concert for him that same year in 1991. And Axl was apparently angry that he went to work with somebody who had been accused of child molestation. And this is according to an interview given by the band's former manager, Doug Goldstein, in Rolling Stone Brazil in 2015. I'm confused about this because the big accusations against Michael Jackson and the ensuing court case didn't happen until 1993, so a few years later. But I don't know, maybe there were whispers in the industry about stories with Michael Jackson before that. Or maybe he kept up a relationship with Michael Jackson into the mid 90s, and that was why Axl was mad. But yeah, he, I guess, felt betrayed that Slash would associate with somebody who had these accusations against him, given his own personal history with childhood abuse. So yeah, it's unclear, but that's the theory that behind their split in 1996.
They got back together though. They reformed minus.
Recently.
I think it's just the three of them minus Sorum, who replaced Adler. Anyway, Axl's mom remarried a guy named Stephen L. Bailey, who beat Axl and his siblings and raised them in an extremely religious household. He talks about he said, I think at one point, we would have a TV one week, and then his dad would have a fit of religious purity and throw the TV out. But Axl grows up singing in churches, which is very interesting and cute, and that's where he kind of got all the different voices that he would use because he really does have a tremendous range. I mean, he's ostensibly...
It's like Marvin Gaye, kind of.
I think when they did that big, which lead singer has the biggest range thing, he was up there in the top three. It was Prince, him, Freddie Mercury.
I have a controversial entry for this.
Go on.
I'm not saying necessarily octave range, but just in styles that they can sing. Paul McCartney. Doing the Little Richard, Along Tall Sally.
Sure.
Doing the Fats Domino stuff. I mean, doing the gospel along a winding road.
He's probably got, and not to short sell him, but he's probably got three. The thing is really the falsetto register, because octaves, because when you hit like Prince or Mike Patton, those guys are up in dog whistle register. You got to look up. Everybody go and Mike Patton is a guy who was briefly in Faith No More. He sings the big Faith. You want it all. That one, that's him singing. But he's had an incredibly varied career. He does all kinds of stuff. Just go onto YouTube and look up a compilation of his high notes. For a guy who does not have big name recognition, that man is one of the craziest singers alive. Anyway, Axl found out about his biological dad at 17 and quickly descends into just the stereotype of juvenile delinquency. He racks up 20 plus arrests for things like public intoxication and battery, serves jail time. And he moves to LA in 1982 after...
Wait, so that's all before he moves to LA?
Oh yeah. God. This is his origin story. We're not even in LA yet. Lafayette authorities were going to just charge him as a habitual criminal and just I think prison, not jail, prison.
Can you do that?
I'm sure in Lafayette, Indiana in the 80s, you could do a lot of shit. Axl is problematic. He not a nice guy. Sorry. Not a nice guy. Constantly getting into fights with people. Just a garbage person to most of the women in his life. Was or is almost certainly a homophobe and racist, given some of the songs and lyrics he just chose to lay down. But people have said, for the most part, he was at least less up than a lot of his bandmates, chemically speaking. This was, I think, what some people have said because he was on medication to control his bipolar disorder, or as they called it back in the day, manic depressive. The band's former European publicist, Arlette Veric, told Loudwire, Axl wasn't really doing drugs because of the medication he was on. He was not a big drinker either. People have a misconception about that, but he was the clean and mostly sober one, really. He wanted to preserve his voice, and he was serious about it. And then Zutto adds to that, Axl was the only sober one, and he was surrounded by guys that were either strung out on heroin, drugged out on pills, or in an alcoholic stupor, and that added to some of the friction in the band. Axl didn't want to be around the guys that were all f***ed up.
Zutto talked more about this in an interview with Rolling Stone. He said that even in this rental house that had been completely ripped apart by the band, Axl locked himself away. He said there was this padlocked door. You go inside, and there was Axl in this immaculate, perfect room surrounded by all this squalor. That was the dichotomy of Guns N' Roses.
One woman, Vicky Hamilton, who was an early manager of theirs, she even suggested that he had multiple personality disorder and raises a truly alarming fact. She said he has this very likable little boy personality, and then he has the demon dog from hell personality. And then she says the color of his eyes actually changes when he goes into this different person.
Wow.
Ugh. Even sober, he was a handle. The band was supposedly they were set to sign their Geffen contract at 6 p.m. on a Friday, which seems like a weird time, but maybe par for the course of the music industry. And Axl was upset because he couldn't find his contact lenses in his apartment.
Maybe that's why his eyes changed color when he's pissed.
Yeah,
he couldn't find him. He was furious.
So he disappears in a huff, and they found him meditating on top of the whiskey.
As one does, like a
who among
sunset,
us?
like a sleazy Sunset Strip Dalai Lama.
He shows up to sign the contract 3 hours later. He legally changed his name around this time, but it had not gone through when he got his check, so he didn't have a bank account, and he just kept his portion of their advance stuffed in socks in his apartment or in his boots, just rolling around LA with like thousands of dollars crammed in his biker boots.
Is it weird that I think that being 3 hours late isn't that bad for like Axl time or Guns N' Roses in this era?
I mean, grading on a curve, yeah.
Yeah.
Slash has a much more cosmopolitan upbringing, interestingly enough. Born Saul Hudson in Hampstead, London.
That's up there with
kills
Alice
me.
Cooper's real name, like Victor Furrier.
Vincent Furnier. Yeah. His mother, Slash's mom, Ola Hudson, was an African-American fashion designer and costumier whose clients included David Bowie, whom she dated, Ringo Starr, and Janis Joplin.
I didn't know the Janis Joplin one. Wow. But yeah, Bowie talks a lot about knowing Baby Slash in the 70s. And this was in his Thin White Duke era. I think Slash's mom did the costumes for the Man Who Fell to Earth movie, too. Slash later said that having Bowie come over to see his mom when he was a little boy was like watching an alien land in your backyard. And he also recalled a time that he walked in on them naked, which is traumatizing.
David Bowie had sex with my mom. I mean, kid, you weren't alone. His dad, Anthony Hudson, was an illustrator, and he drew album covers for the likes of Neil Young and Joni Mitchell. And Slash said, "I've always been amused that I'm both British and black, particularly because so many American musicians seem to aspire to be British, while so many British musicians, in the 60s in particular, went to such great pains to be black." That's very astute. I like that. He was raised by his father and paternal grandparents in Stoke-on-Trent. And then when he was around 5, he and his dad joined his mom in LA. Fun fact, he was a bicycle motocross star as a kid.
Wow.
Cantor grew up with him, and Slash says he met Mark Cantor trying to steal his mini bike. But this guy says the tricks that he performed on his bike were ahead of the time. Slash was a star. He starts playing guitar in 1980. He initially wanted to be a bassist.
Wait, so he'd only been playing guitar like 5-6 years when they were wow, that's crazy to me.
Yeah. 10,000 hours, baby. He worked 12-hour shifts in a clock factory to pay for his guitar collection, which is adorable. Imagine little Slash like lugging
with Geppetto.
Well, yeah, I doubt he was a watchmaker,
No.
but that's much more funny if he has like the jeweler's loop in his eye, like making watch mechanisms. He's probably just schlepping like Rolexes around in a warehouse or something. Anyway, he forms his first band in 1981 and another in 1983 along with Steven Adler. So these guys went back with each other. The second band also included Duff, and they auditioned one-time Black Flag vocalist Ron Reyes as their vocalist. Didn't take. Slash's heroic chemical intake may have been because of his admitted stage fright. He gets nervous in front of crowds and he doesn't want to look directly at them, which inspired his most recognizable trademark, other than the Les Paul, the top hat. I just think all of these super aggro musicians with stage fright is just so cute. Lemmy famously sang in Motorhead with the mic up over his head and angled downwards, and that was so he would have to sing with his chin tilted up and wouldn't have to look at the crowds.
I didn't know that. Wow.
So cute.
I don't know if this really counts, but John Lennon in pretty much all the Beatles days, he never wore his glasses. So when he'd be on stage, you'd have this kind of intense look, especially in the early like Cavern days and in Hamburg, where he looked like he was just kind of glaring at the audience. It was because he couldn't see a thing. And I think he thought that the glasses weren't cool, but I think he also kind of liked it that way too, because he didn't want to know what the crowd was like.
Yeah. Slash has told the genesis of his hat a few times. My favorite retelling of it is Conan O'Brien. Just this year, he found it in 85, and he said, "I remember this because there were 2 stores. There was Leathers and Treasures,
Good
and
name.
next door to that, Retail Slut."
That's good.
I went in there and I didn't have any money, and I just saw the top hat. It spoke to me. I figured, what the f***, I'll just walk out with it and see what happens. So I did. Then I went next door to Leathers and Treasures, and I stole a concho belt and went back to the apartment me and Axel were living in at the time. We had a show at the Whiskey that night, so I took the concho belt and I cut it up and put it around the hat, and I wore it that night. Eventually, he said, it just became a thing where I really identified with it. Like I wore it all the time. There was a way to pull it over your eyes. You could hide behind it if you were really high. It was great for bad hair days. I had no intention of it being this long-term show thing.
I heard that it was also a tribute to Mark Bolan. Had you ever heard that?
I didn't read
T-Rex
that
fan.
it seems likely, but no, I didn't read him saying that. I like the idea that it's become this albatross around his neck. Like he just like wakes up and looks at it.
Gotta wear the hat.
Time to make the donuts. Time to put on the top hat.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
The band struggled to find a producer for their debut record. My favorite anecdote for this is Kiss guitarist Paul Stanley, who showed up at an apartment the label had rented for them on Sunset, found Izzy and Stradlin nodding out on the couch, and I guess just waited for them to wake up. And they played him some demos, including an early version of Night Train, which he liked, but suggested that it maybe needed an extra hook in the chorus. And that was enough for Axl Rose to never speak to Paul Stanley again, or even look at him. He supposedly refused to look at Paul Stanley.
I mean, if you looked at Paul Stanley...
Yeah, fair.
I heard that Paul Stanley wanted to give Welcome to the Jungle a chorus that, I think to use his words, was more memorable, more sing-along, more anthemic. Basically make it a Kiss song. And Guns N' Roses were offended by that.
Welcome to the jungle. Paul Stanley also supposedly wanted to take drums out of Adler's heroically large drum set, which was a no-no.
I had heard that the band hid some of his kit, when they were
exactly.
recording.
They were all like, "You guys, you have too many drums." I'm guessing he had the big 17 probably like a Neil Peart and Rush style kit, and they literally hid them from him so that he would not have as many to play.
In his autobiography, The Heroin Diaries, meanwhile, Motley Crue's Nikki Sixx claimed that he was begged, those are the words he uses, I think, several times to produce Guns N' Roses' first album. Slash talked about eyeing producer Tom Werman, who'd also worked with Motley Crue, who, as we mentioned earlier, were signed by Tom Zutaut. Werman attended a Guns N' Roses rehearsal. They were playing the song Mr. Brownstone, and they were playing it so loud that he just walked out, never to return.
Robert John Mutt Lange, our guy, was also floated, but he cost too much. So the band went with a guy named Mike Klink, who would go on to work on a host of other iconic hard rock records like Metallica's And Justice for All, as well as the Super Bowl XXXV halftime show featuring Aerosmith, NSYNC, Nelly, and Britney Spears.
Also known as the weirdest halftime show in NFL history.
Yeah. A big problem around this time in getting Appetite off the ground is that they just refused to stop playing live. They just did not take enough time off from playing live shows to get their together.
Well, it's probably a trauma response, too. This is their only way of making money, and when they're splitting a hamburger 5 ways, they probably are like, this could all evaporate. All right, we should, do what we can to make sure we have money flowing.
They did get $75,000, which they promptly blew.
Yeah, I'm gonna say split 5 ways.
Yes, sure.
And you're living like Guns N' Roses?
Sure, we'll give them that generous reading. You know my whole thing about being a musician post-digital and reading about these guys who had more money than God and squandered it all. They burned through their advance within weeks, and Zutaut said they blew through a further $100K. $100,000. So 25 more than their advance they went through. They rented them apartments. They rented them Cecil B. DeMille's former house, which we'll cover in a second. He said they were about 2/3 of an album short of material. Yes, this rented house that belonged to Cecil B. DeMille, which is where Sweet Child of Mine came together to jam session. Slash was noodling around on this technical exercise that he had worked out. He called it a circus melody, which now I can't unhear.
Yeah.
Because it does kind of sound like a calliope.
Yeah. Wasn't it just like a string skipping exercise or something? For his
Yeah, he
fingers?
was working on his right hand picking, and the band just started jamming on it. Axl heard it from upstairs and started writing lyrics to it based on his girlfriend at the time, Erin Everly.
She's the daughter of Don Everly of the Everly Brothers, who fans will know from our American Pie episode. And her grandfather, I didn't realize this, was a guy named Robert Stevenson, who was a movie director. He directed Mary Poppins and other Disney movies, Herbie the Love Bug, and Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
1 degree of separation between Axl Rose and Herbie the Love Bug.
And Mary Poppins. Yeah,
and Mary Poppins.
That's amazing. The line where everything was as fresh as the bright blue sky had a really personal meaning for Axl. Yeah, can you give us that? Yeah. He told the LA Times, the blue skyline was actually one of my first childhood memories. Looking at the blue sky and wishing I could disappear in it because it was so beautiful. Isn't that nice?
Aww.
Yeah, isn't that nice? Oh, okay. Hold that sweet moment in your soul. I'm about to rip it apart. There might be a slightly more sinister interpretation of the song, which again, everyone has sort of historically thought was just a love song, basically, to Erin Everly. According to an interview that Axl gave with Eddie Trunk in 2006, the video that they wanted to do for the song, quote, was supposed to be of an Asian woman carrying a baby into the United States. At the end of the video, the baby, which I assume is revealed to be a doll, is cut open and there is heroin inside because that's what the song is about. That's what Axl says. So that's troubling.
Whoa, sweet child of mine.
I almost wonder if he just was like making that up on the spot.
He makes up everything. He's just so full of it. I mean, that's the thing, dude. What do people say about like you stop maturing at the age you get famous?
Yeah.
He was a juvenile delinquent who was in one of the biggest bands in the world when he was like 21. It's a John Mulaney thing. Is Mick Jagger nice? No.
Well, I mean, in addition to the fame thing, he probably stopped maturing even earlier because of all the traumatic stuff that happened to him, really.
Yeah, it's true. So he finishes the word the next day, and the band adds the bridge and the where do we go? The breakdown at the end, along with a guitar solo inspired by Freebird. Every guitar solo is inspired by Freebird. What are you guys saying?
Yeah, Leonard Skinner was a big influence on the song. Slash has also cited influences like Manfred Mann's version of Blinded by the Light, and my favorite, Gary Rafferty's Baker Street.
It's the best saxophone hook in a rock song of all time. That and Turn the Page by Seeger,
I was going to say,
right?
yeah. Oh, that song makes me sad. Yeah.
It's so good. Slash hated this song, which is so funny. I hated that song with a huge passion for the longest time, he said, and it turned out to be our hugest hit. So it goes to show what I know.
It's got to be annoying to play. Like if it was started off as a finger exercise, like just to try to get your fingers nimble, that's got to be like a tough and probably very annoying song just to play from a physical standpoint. And yeah, he said repeatedly over the years that if Axl hadn't been listening in and showed up with lyrics that he'd written to what they've been playing, there's no way in hell that Sweet Child of Mine would have been turned into a song. I have a Slash guitar question for you. Is it true that he used a Les Paul copy on this album because he like basically hawked his good stuff for money?
Yeah. The big one around the time in this era is BC Rich, which is the pointy neon ones that you see. I think CC DeVille was the note, but he played a Mockingbird, which I think Slash also, you see pictures of him with that in the Cantor book. But yeah, he went through a few different guitars. He was trying to play an SG on it and got so frustrated that he threw it through the window of a van, which I believe it was a rented guitar.
And probably a rented van.
Yeah, although we looked this up last night, right? We actually found where that Gibson comes from.
Oh yeah, it is a luthier by the name of Chris Derrig who died a few months before Appetite for Destruction was released in 1987, unfortunately, which is really sad because he didn't live to see that this guitar, I think he made something like 20 copies of the Les Paul, became really sought after. I think Slash only has 2 of them. I think like Lenny Kravitz has one, and like Charlie Daniels for some reason had one. Like they became really sought after. And then Gibson put out a signature model. So they put out a replica of a replica, which is great because they got passed off as the real thing. There's, for all I know, maybe one or two of these 20 copies out there are floating around by people who don't know they're not real because they have Gibson on the headstock. So
there's a whole thing about what they call lawsuit guitars from the late 70s because Fender changes hands. CBS buys Fender around this time, and the quality kind of goes to like if you're looking up used Fenders online, they differentiate between pre and post CBS years, and companies like Ibanez were making these like copies in Japan of famous guitar models that were many cases better. And they would even write Ibanez in like the Fender script. They're called lawsuit bases because Fender and Gibson sued them to get them to stop being made. But yeah, it was so Gibson Les Paul copy. I think he had Seymour Duncan pickups in there, and then they just plugged into a Marshall, man. The classic sound. The Cecil DeMille house, Cecil DeMille, Cecil B. DeMille, Cecil DeMille that was a portmanteau of Poison guitarist Cecil DeVille. Poison grew up next to me in Pennsylvania, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Bret Michaels was like the next town over,
Bret
right?
Michaels grew up in Mechanicsburg. I think the bassist grew up in Harrisburg, and the drummer went to my high school.
Wow.
Not at the same time, obviously, but that was like our big like musical success story.
Oh, this would have been right around La Rock of Love, right? So that must have been like serious bragging rights.
Yeah, bragging rights. That's the word for it. So the DeMille house has my favorite quote. The landlord summoned Zuto and the band's then manager Arnold Stifelto. Arnold. The guy's name was Arnold. You happy? That guy said he almost fainted, possibly from the smell. The band had ripped the toilets out of the floor and thrown them through the windows.
Maybe they were frightened of the sight of them. They'd been in a place with no toilets for so long. Like,
what the hell is that? Kill it with fire. Zuto says the inside was even worse. Quote, people were defecating in the sinks. The holes in the floor where the toilets got ripped off were filled with urine. There were half-eaten Whoppers with mold on the wrappers. They would get in these drug rages and just go berserk. The damage to the house totaled $22,000. And Arnold, whose name was on the lease, submitted that to Geffen Records and then promptly dropped the band as clients. So if you are keeping attention, the money that we know about, which I'm sure does not even begin to cover it, 75 grand advance, further 100 grand expenses, 175,000, damage to the Cecil B. DeMille house, 22,000. We are at $197,000 before they even record the basic tracks to this record.
And that doesn't factor in drugs.
Yeah, exactly. Stripper budgets.
Or maybe it does. Maybe the 100 grand, I don't know. We don't know that. But these people were feral.
That is the word for it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a story where they showed up at the Geffen offices with a woman clad only in a shower curtain, still soaking wet.
Jesus Christ. Finally, we'll get into the songs. Truly one of the greatest all-time side one, track ones. Best album openers. Definitely a short list. Welcome to the Jungle. Supposedly it came together in like 3 hours.
Wow.
Again, this is kind of the most united the band would be on that front. They were just bringing fragments to each other and work on different things together. And Slash said Welcome to the Jungle was really the first thing we all collaborated on. He said that Axl remembered the main riff to that song from something that Slash played while Axl was living in Slash's mom's basement. So at some point, he had this memory of being like, hey, you remember that thing you played 4 years ago or whatever it was? Just incredible stuff. And the breakdown. Do you know where you are? You're in the jungle, baby. Oh,
there it is.
There it is. That was written in 1978 from Duff's first punk band. And Axl supposedly gets that thing that I just did from he and his buddy got off a Greyhound in New York, and a homeless guy supposedly looked at him and said, do you know where you are? You're in the jungle, baby. You're going to die. Which, I believe it. Port Authority's rough.
Yeah. The version I heard was that Axl was spending the night in a playground in Queens, and some guy saw him and shouted that at him. And yet, still another version I heard was that Axl hitchhiked with a trucker to L.A., and the trucker dropped him off, and he said, welcome to the jungle, and drove off.
Well, that is what's in the video. Like, he's like hitchhiking and comes out. He literally has the f***ing wheat like hanging out of his mouth. Like he put it in.
Does he have
Indiana,
like a bindle on his back?
Izzy's girlfriend at the time, a woman named Desi Kraft, recalls the incident that led to the song Mr. Brownstone. We've been dancing with Mr. Brownstone. My mid-register axle is not as good as my falsetto axle. She said Slash came to our place on Orchid with a lump of Mexican tar heroin and wanted to cook it all up. Izzy and I told him to just do a little bit because there was this death tar going around. And remember that Izzy was dealing, so he knew from heroin. Slash said it was okay and shut up. Well, he pretty much went rigor mortis in the chair, and we got him on the floor and gave him mouth to mouth. After which she says they all wrote the song, and she is upset that she is not cut in on that, which is fair.
Wow. Didn't they write it on the back of like a paper grocery bag or something? I thought I read that they wrote it on the back of something.
Or a Whopper wrapper once they clean the mold off.
There's been debate over the years. I mean, it's widely believed that this song was about heroin. I think Slash has, and some other members of the band have tried to kind of walk that interpretation back. But during a show that the band was performing in Los Angeles, I think they were opening for the Rolling Stones in October 1989, Axl said on the stage, unless certain people in this band get their crap together, crap's my edit, can you imagine Axl Rose saying crap? I can't. These will be the last Guns N' Roses show you'll ever see, because I'm tired of too many people in this organization dancing with Mr. Damn Brownstone. So sounds like he at least believed it to be about heroin. And this on-stage tirade got the attention of his bandmates because Slash and Izzy and Steven Adler promised to clean up after that. Don't know how long that lasted, but apparently the message got through. The song Mr. Brownstone also addresses Axl's habit of being tardy for shows. There's a line, the shows usually start around 7, we go on stage around 9. And Axl has addressed this tendency as if it were a medical diagnosis that he has no control over. He said, I pretty much follow my own internal clock and I perform better later at night. Nothing seems to work out for me until later at night. I don't want to make people sit around and wait. It drives me nuts. That hour-and-a-half or 2-hour time period that I'm late going on stage is living hell because I'm wishing there was any way on earth I could get out of where I am and knowing I'm not going to be able to make it.
Horse. I mean, he literally caused a living hell. Look, I don't want to.
He has some demons. He has some.
Yeah,
issues,
I have certainly, in the
illness.
depths of my depression, been able to get up out of do anything. But also, people were not dangling 7-figure checks in front of me to just do the thing that is nominally what I am supposed to do. I mean, you remember the whole Metallica thing, right?
No.
They were on tour together. James Hetfield steps into a pyro and like horrifically burns half his body.
I have not heard this, no.
Co-headlining tour in 1992 between GNR and Metallica. In Montreal, James Hetfield basically, he said there was too much pyro. So they were choreographed for some pyro, and there was extra pyro, and it blew him up. I mean, he had 2nd and 3rd degree burns. It could not finish the show, and, you know, they talk about this in one of those VH1 shows. I think it's Jason Newsted is like, you know, Guns N' Roses really could have stepped up and saved that show. They could have come on and done like a heroic set and united everyone. And Guns N' Roses did not do that. They took a long time to get on the stage, and then they played like a short set. And the audience rioted and literally took to the streets of Montreal and like set fire to things and flipped cars. So, like, maybe set a f***ing alarm, Axl. Anyway, moving on. My Michelle.
The band also wrote the song My Michelle in tribute to the band's friend Michelle Young, who was one of the many women in their lives who supported the band by, you know, every means necessary. Them, giving them housing, more or less
emotional support. Every
Yeah.
single level of the Maslow pyramid. These women fulfilled for these guys.
And I guess she was traveling with the band once, and Elton John's Your Song came on the radio, and she commented how she always wanted a song written about her. And Axl remembered this and eventually delivered with My Michelle. But instead of sweet, romanticized lyrics, he came up with this unvarnished portrait of her difficult life. And she was later told Classic Rock magazine in 2005, at the time I didn't care because I was so messed up. But what it says is all true. My dad does distribute porno films, and my mom did die. Even the sweet stories with Guns N' Roses
Yeah.
have this underside.
When they finally get around to recording in January of 87, basic tracks were recorded at a studio owned by Captain of Captain and Tennille. That is so funny. Man.
I mean, hey, Daryl Dragon was a musical powerhouse. He was
Daryl
a touring
Dragon.
member. Yeah, it was just his real name, by the way. He was a touring member of the Beach Boys in the 60s and early 70s, and it was Mike Love who gave him the nickname Captain Keyboard. Oh, that Mike. I also
Real
love
way
that
with words.
Yeah. Maroon 5 also recorded songs about Jane at his studio. I just think it's amazing that in the same place where Welcome to the Jungle is recorded, Sunday Morning was also recorded.
Zuto said the band might have worked consistently for 1 week, and the next week they didn't turn up. When Axl was in the frame of mind to work, he might work for 2 or 3 days straight and then not turn up for a week, or he might come in every day during an 8-hour period. I assume what he means is 4 8-hour period. Yeah, I mean that's manic depressive. That's bipolar behavior. You know, the same thing with they talk about Charles Mingus, Thelonious Monk. Yeah,
I didn't
you just
know
go
that.
you. Oh yeah, both of those guys. I mean, they were
Likely
also
undiagnosed, but
yeah, and like extremely self-medicating. I probably already told you this. There's this anecdote in the Charles Mingus biography, Myself When I Am Real, where they go backstage and each just take a handful of pills out of a shoebox with loose pills floating around it and just gobble them all down. So yeah, don't self-medicate, folks. Producer Mike Klink tells an amazing story. Duff would show up at the door one afternoon when we were doing guitar dubs with his arm in a sling. I think he might have had a black eye and he was limping. When I asked what happened, he said, well, you know, we were stair diving. As if that explains it. Folks, what stair diving is when you try and jump, at least in the GNR world, is when you try and jump from the top of the stairs at someone's apartment to the bottom landing without hitting a step in between.
my favorite Guns N' Roses arm injury story, of which there are many, involves Slash, who showed up to interview mixing candidates for this album with his arm in a cast. And apparently he'd broken it by repeatedly hitting the floor to stop a record from skipping. Why didn't he simply get up to fix it, you might ask? Because he was having sex at the time. He would hit the floor hard enough to at least hairline fracture his arm.
Mid in flagrante.
Yeah.
What a jackass. Ron Schneider added that Slash is broken up with his girlfriend at the time and had 2 green garbage bag full of clothes and all of his other personal effects and was living in the studio in whichever room wasn't being utilized. Mike Klink said Izzy was also doing that, or maybe he just got both of them confused. And apparently, as Steven Adler threw a lot of tantrums over the drum sound, which drummers, and was just tossing furniture around. I mean, these guys, but truly the worst recording related anecdote for this album concerns the closer Rocket Queen. In Manhattan, where they were doing vocal dubs, Axl cajoled a stripper in the band's orbit named Adriana Smith, who was then 19, into having sex with him while he was recording in the vocal booth, supposedly pausing at points to yell at her to make it real and stop faking. This supposedly took 2 hours that they were in this booth messing around, and Axl was giving her direction. She was the drummer's girlfriend at the time. She was mad at him for cheating on her, and she wanted to get back at him. The engineer, Vic Dalio, who's credited in the liner notes as just Vic the f***ing engineer, if I recall correctly.
Yes, you're
described
correct.
the vocal booth as like a Ron Jeremy set in there. She called this process pretty mechanical, which like I just love, man. Her moans end up prominently in the final mix. Well, I guess I don't know prominently. I never knew about this until it was pointed out to me. But
Did I point it out to you?
No, it's just
Okay.
like I think this was.
I would hate to have that on my conscience.
Predictably, when Adler found out about this, Smith said he freaked out, and her resulting shame and guilt over the incident sent her into an alcohol and drug abuse spiral, which is very sad. But he has apparently mellowed on it.
Adler,
yes. He has a truly incredible quote in that book. I love Adriana. She is amazing. She did what she did. It was cool. it didn't matter. We weren't married or anything. We were just, quote, and here, that was the wind up, and here's the pitch. We were naked skydivers from hell. I don't know what that means, but it's a truly incredible rock and roll quote, baby. I wonder if when Axl's having sex, he makes all those dumb noises. Do you know where you are? Yeah, Axel, I'm having sex with you. You're in the jungle, baby.
I mean, well, I guess while we're on this topic, there's so many topics out here that I really never have a chance to delve into until very specific moments. This is one of them. I'd like to take a quick conversational detour to do a lightning round on artists having sex in the studio. As it happens, this is something I know a bit about, albeit not from firsthand experience. About 10 years ago, when I was working at VH1, I wrote an article entitled Sex in the Studio, 10 Artists Who Got Down While Laying It Down. So, with your blessing, I'd like to pull some excerpts from that. First, Jim Morrison on the Doors track, Your Lost Little Girl. The Lizard King is known for being a shouter on records, but he wanted to take a gentle approach while recording this delicate track for the Doors' sophomore album, Strange Days, in 1967. He idolized crooners. He loved Frank Sinatra. I think that was one of his vocal heroes. You kind of hear that on the song Touch Me when he does the, I'm gonna love you, that whole part. Yeah, he really goes full crooner on that. Yeah. So he was trying to get this soft, close mic approach for the song Your Lost Little Girl, which is a beautiful song, one of my favorites. Yeah. My love for the song is mired only slightly by this anecdote. He wasn't able to get that soft, delicate vocal approach. So his girlfriend, Pamela Corson, decided to try an unorthodox technique. According to keyboard player Ray Manzarek's autobiography, Light My Fire, a truly fantastic book, she had the lights dimmed and quietly padded into the studio and gave Jim oral sex in the middle of a take. And I believe that's the one you hear on the record.
Does Marvin Gaye rubbing one out count?
Yeah. We'll count that. No. This is on the mic. We're going for on the mic anecdotes.
Okay, not pre. All right, continue.
Biggie Smalls on Respect. There's a skit at the end of the song from Ready to Die that features, I'm sorry, what I can only describe as a distinctive slurpy sound that has grossed out rap fans for decades. Many have debated whether or not it was, authentic or not, and it wasn't until 2009 that Huffington Post journalist Barry Michael Cooper had the chance to ask Diddy, who produced the record, and settle this argument once and for all. Diddy said, yeah, these are questions that nobody's ever asked, but I think Big would be all right with it, and he confirmed the long-held rumor. Moving on to my beloved Beach Boys. Yes, my beloved Beach Boys have a sex on record anecdote, although considering they also recorded a song by Charles Manson, maybe this shouldn't be that this is maybe one of the least surprising stories about the Beach Boys. It's the song All I Want to Do, which is kind of a deep cut off of a deep album, 1969's 2020. It's all gets back to drummer Dennis Wilson. Anyone who knows anything about the Beach Boys could probably guess it. He was involved with this. He was the true heart of America's band. The only member of the group who actually surfed. His daredevil spirit was matched only by his intense sexual appetite. So it kind of makes sense that he'd be the one to try to sneak a little smut onto the formerly squeaky clean group's records. The song All I Want to Do, if you crank the volume at the fade out of this really raucous track, you hear distinctive noises and screams. I'll just leave it at that. And I'd known the song for years and was never really sure what that was supposed to be at the end of the song. But according to the band's day-to-day activity book that was published, I think in 2013, it's like a day-to-day diary, it's confirmed. There's an entry for November 12th, 1968 that reads, "The group worked on All I Want to Do, in particular the song's tag. For this, Dennis enlists the help of a female friend who's recorded having sex with the drummer in the studio. This sound effect is layered." I love they get into studio technical jargon for this. The sound effect is layered onto the fade out of the song's final mix and is just about audible on the released version. And even the liner notes for the album boast of an X-rated surprise at the end of the song.
It wasn't a theremin. It wasn't a goat.
No, it's not. Yeah. Let's move on to Prince and Kim Basinger on the Scandalous Suite EP. Back in the 80s, Prince harbored not-so-secret ambitions to be a star maker, supplying gooey pop songs to gorgeous ladies. And they didn't always have to be singers. Case in point, this unlikely collaboration with the film star Kim Basinger, his rumored girlfriend at the time in 1989. The Purple One. By the way, I'm reading what I wrote like 10 years ago, so this would have been written in a more respectful tone, maybe, if this was post Prince's death. The Purple One recorded an EP entitled The Scandalous Suite, which was a 20-minute expansion of his song Scandalous from the Batman film soundtrack. Kim's vocal contributions consisted primarily of moans, leading many to speculate that the pair were really partying like it was 1999 in the recording studio. According to studio lore, Prince and Kim showed up to the studio one day with a jar of honey and told everyone to get lost. The pair were done for the day by the time tape engineers had returned, but the entire mixing board was smeared with honey.
Like Winnie the Pooh was in there.
Early editions of the EP came with a collectible jar of honey, leading many to assume that this was just, to commemorate this sticky occasion. But, honey is really good for soothing throats of vocalists, so maybe it was just a, vocal lubricant.
Ew.
I didn't mean it that. I really didn't. And we got to end with Serge Gainsbourg. Serge, the Parisian pop maestro, wrote the notoriously erotic song Je t'aime moi non plus. The ultimate love song was what he wanted it to be. And he wrote it for his then girlfriend, Brigitte Bardot. I didn't really realize they were dating until researching this story. The original recording took place in 1967 over a 2-hour session in a Parisian studio where the pair were jammed into a cramped glass vocal booth, and the glass apparently literally got steamy. Yeah, it was like the scene in Titanic. Yeah. Reports of this song hit the press before it was even released, and it was described as audio verite, featuring groans, sighs, and Bardot's cries of pleasure, giving the impression you're listening to two people making love. The news made it all the way to Bardot's estranged husband. Of course, she was married at the time. So this is one of the most French stories we've ever discussed on the show. She was married to the German businessman Gunter Sachs at the time, and he was a powerful guy. He furiously demanded that the single be withdrawn, and Gainsbourg relented after a very emotional letter from Brigitte Bardot herself. And Gainsbourg, he was heartbroken. He said, "This music is very pure. For the first time in my life, I wrote a love song, and it's taken badly." He's devastated. But he recorded the song 2 years later in 1969 with another girlfriend, the English actress Jane Birkin, and it was released to much shock, outrage, and success all around the world, where it was banned in many countries as well. I think probably the United States as well, but I think it went to number 1 in the UK. Anyway.
And then later he tried to pull the same trick with Whitney Houston live on television.
Yeah, and he also recorded a song with his 14-year-old daughter, Charlotte Gainsbourg, called, I believe, Lemon Incest.
Right. God. Anyway, Paradise City was, according to Slash, written in the back of a rental van on the way back from San Francisco. And he and Rose worked together on the chorus. Polite euphemism. Rose sang "Take Me Down to the Paradise City," and Slash responded, "Where the grass is green and the girls are pretty." Rose sang the first line again, and Slash responded this time with "Where the girls are fat and they've got big titties." And he lobbied to keep that line in the song. Thankfully, the rest of the band outvoted him.
Gosh. An old friend of Axl's named Jake Query called into an Indianapolis radio station, I think at the height of the band's popularity, and he claimed that the line in the song "The grass is green and the girls are pretty" is about when Axl and his family would go down to Bloomington, Indiana. Probably a rare, positive moment from his childhood. So make of that what you will.
As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages.
Before Guns N' Roses started recording Appetite, they did a one-day demo session with the guitarist from the band Nazareth, Manny Charlton, at Sound City Studios in LA. And one of the songs that was recorded during this early demo session was November Rain. And according to Slash's memoir, this early version was 18 minutes long. I've also seen accounts that says that it's up to 25 minutes. That I believe that. Manny Charlton recorded this piano demo, which he just said left him absolutely stunned. And he said, that's going to be the centerpiece of your debut. That's the one. What an incredible track. And Axl looked up from the piano and said, nope, that's for the second album.
Yeah, they didn't want to have, quote, 2 ballads on the record, and they considered
Sweet Child of Mine.
They considered that a ballad.
Didn't Shannon Hoon from Blind Melon sing back up on the Use Your Illusion version?
Yeah, he and or his sister and Axl were friends in Lafayette.
Oh, from Indiana. They're both from Indiana, right?
Yep.
Or maybe they just bonded over being from Indiana once.
No, they knew each other. He knew Shannon's older sister in Indiana.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he claimed that this record was a lot of just second or third takes because, like, that's where the energy is, man, or whatever. But Klink has been also cited as doing a lot of tape edits on this one with the old razor blade, working like 8-hour days on this.
18-hour days.
18-hour days, yeah. Jesus.
The perfectionism on this album really doesn't get discussed enough. I know we talked about them ripping out toilets and rotted whoppers, but Axl in particular had a perfectionist streak. I mean, how long did Chinese Democracy take? 15 years to make. So you could definitely see the seeds of that here. I heard that Axl insisted on recording his vocals line by line, and that's what ate up most of the album's fairly sizable budget. I think Dusty Springfield used to do that too, at least at one point in her career. And so I guess while Axl was doing this line by line thing, the rest of the band would just, they couldn't deal with just being in the studio for that. So they would just go and hang out at local bars, which I'm sure worked out great for everyone.
Yeah, Klink, I think, talks about doing the scream at the end of Welcome to the Jungle over the course of many, many takes. It's a great scream. It's up there with Won't Get Fooled Again, all-time rocks, and like everything Robert Plant recorded from 1967 to 69.
How can you do that many screams in
cocaine?
Okay. Yeah.
Uppers.
Just physiologically, though, not even just like energy-wise.
I read somewhere that Kendrick does like 20 takes of his verses just to like warm up his voice. I don't know, dude. It's insane. Vocal cords are a muscle.
That's true.
You can work them out like anything else. The total budget for this record was $370,000, which is unheard of for a band's debut. What were we at before? We were at 197 with the pre-recording expenses. Let me do a quick little math here. 190.
I think it was 195.
195 plus 370, $565,000 before the record even comes out. And again, that is just what people have quoted as saying. This is not including, whatever cash they were handed at the time, whatever. We don't have the expense reports, so someone else's. Oh, yeah, whatever.
I mean, it's weird to me that this almost seems low for me, considering it's the peak of the mid-'80s record bloat. But it's interesting to me that Mike Klink and a number of others associated with the album have observed that it's really one of the last records made in the manner of old school classic rock albums. It was mastered with vinyl in mind, edited with a razor blade and 2-inch tape, and mixed on a non-automated board with a bunch of hands moving the faders frantically. And assistant mixing engineer Victor DiGilio, who you mentioned earlier for the... you mentioned earlier. I'll just leave it at that. It could be seen as the last great rock record made totally by hand.
Yeah.
You seem to disagree.
I do. I mean, digital boards and digital stuff had kind of been coming around. But I don't know, man. I mean, like, Albini was doing stuff straight to tape at the time. Like, I'm sure the Nirvana stuff was not done digitally. I'm sure Metallica was. Well, what do I know?
But you think it was mixed with, like, vinyl in mind, though?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. Maybe not. I don't know. It's an interesting point, because CDs would have been coming in. I don't know. Anyway, cover art. The original painting for this that was supposed to be on the cover of this is gross and messed up and weird. It depicts a robotic, there's no other word for it, rapist in the immediate aftermath of a rape, with the woman on the ground next to it, about to be punished, caught, I don't know, by an even larger robot that's like flying, this monster that's like flying over a fence. Anyway... That painting is based on a guy named Robert Williams, a painting by the same name, Appetite for Destruction.
Oh, wow.
Williams was one of these underground comic artists who produced Zap Comics, which is a popular underground publication, along with guys like R. Crumb. And having a moment at the time, he is referenced in the Red Hot Chili Peppers song Mellowship Slinky in B Major, one of my least favorite songs of all time. I maybe hate that song more than American Pie. That's the song where it's basically Kiedis talking about being arrested by a lady cop and then having sex with her. And this guy Williams' art and his car, what they called a rat rod, which comes from the kind of the Rat Fink California car culture thing. A rat rod is like an old ratty beat up 30s or 40s kind of jalopy thing. That was featured in the music video for the song Who Was in My Room Last Night, from the Butthole Surfers' 1993 record, Independent Worm Saloon. The Butthole Surfers, ladies and gentlemen.
Independent
Worm
Saloon.
They have some truly great album titles. Have you ever gone down the list?
No.
Did you ever read...
I mean, their name is Butthole Surfers. So.
That's true. Did you ever read Our Band Could Be Your Life? There's a chapter in Butthole Surfers on there. It is hilarious. They brought this art to the label, explaining, according to Geffen president Eddie Rosenblatt, that they saw the artwork as a symbolic social statement, with the robot representing the industrial system that's raping and polluting our environment. I don't believe that for a second. You're telling me that an otherwise apolitical band of dirtbags decided to make a conservation message? That is unmitigated record label horseshit.
I heard another explanation from Tom Zutaut. He gave an interview with the LA Times where he said, Axl showed me a card with the Williams painting and said, you realize this is the future. Then he pointed to the woman. This is the victim. This is the media. Above them is the monster that the media creates. And he predicted in 1986 that we are going to live, this is Tom Zutaut still speaking, Axl predicted in 1986 that we were going to live in a world of fake news where we'd feed on tragedy. It depicted human nature and the ugly need we have for an appetite for destruction. I don't know if I believe this either.
Zutaut is so fascinating to me. You mentioned he signed Motley Crue. I mean, this guy has spent his entire life advocating for this band, who I do not think speak to him anymore.
Or would you like to gingerly
let's see if I
on.
can talk around this. When I was at page 6, this story came up 3 years ago at this point, that GNR had banned like the president of their fan club from their shows because he was trading in bootlegs. And I was doing a story about it, and it sprawled out of my control because I interviewed this guy, and he told me this story about driving from like where he lived in, I think, Louisiana to like Virginia, because someone had on the message boards found that there was like an old AT-AT tape in a storage locker. And so he like gathered all the cash he could scrounge and drove to Virginia to buy this tape. The bootleg recording of GNR fans, the way that these guys trade these demos and bootlegs is really insane. And
it sounds like dead level.
It's nuts. I really, it is maybe the most fandom to the least recorded output that I can imagine. Like, there's like, what, 1.5 good Guns N' Roses records? It's Appetite and then parts of the next 3 that they did. But there are people who still, this is like, oh, that's my favorite band of all time. I will take food out of my child's mouth to buy their demo tapes. I think what I found out was that this was an old storage space of Zutaut's. And then I got him on the phone somehow, and he was talking about tape trading and like all the lengths that these guys go to. And I think they silenced him because he was talking about all of it.
I
mean, I got him on the phone.
They took him out?
So what I read was that at some point Guns N' Roses get their Axl, because the band dissolves in the mid-90s and it just becomes the Axl Rose Show when he's making Chinese Democracy, which is this album that took, 15 years to make. And
was it worth it?
Whatever. I've already made enough enemies with this and maybe making more with this story. Anyway, what I was able to piece together is that at some point in the 90s, Axl came under the sway of this Venezuelan gentleman, and if the rumors are to be believed, this guy's mother, who exerted all of this undue pressure and undue influence on him and were semi-responsible for him sort of sucking up into his own head and firing everyone and becoming this megalomaniac. They are also extraordinarily litigious, as typified by banning the president of their fan club from all of their shows. So I get him on the phone and he's telling me all these wild stories about like Axl punching out JFK Jr. over a woman, like all this really wild, unverifiable stuff. And I was like, holy crap, dude, can I call you back about this when I'm in a room by myself, like recording, instead of just like taking this at a crowded desk in an open office? And he was like, sure, man, like blah, blah, blah. And then he just ghosted me. And I think he went to run it by the lawyer, or the lawyer who I had talked to previously called him and was like, you shut your damn mouth, Tom Zito. It's wild, man. The other thing that I remember from this time, and this is all on the record, this is Against Me, one of my favorite bands of all time, have a record called Reinventing Axl Rose. They have a song called Reinventing Axl Rose, which is a screed against music industry, rock star excesses, and a call to arms for like DIY mentality. And in their one DVD, which is called We're Never Going Home, they are talking to a guy from the band Alex is on Fire, or Alexis is on Fire. I never knew how to pronounce that. This guy tells a secondhand anecdote from someone who knew Axl. Said Axl had gotten a copy of the Against Me record and was so incensed by it that he began making voodoo dolls of the members of Against Me and like sticking them in pins and stuff. And his interest in voodoo and Santeria supposedly comes from this manager and his mom. So if either of us come down with mysterious physical maladies after this comes out, it's because of Axl's interest in voodoo. That is my whole sidebar on my brief time researching the Guns N' Roses tape trading community and the lengths to which the band will go to suppress that. Anyway, the label must have known that this art was going to be an issue because they only printed up 130,000 copies of it with that art, which I don't know what they're going for on eBay. Let's take a quick sidebar.
Yeah, is that going to be like the Beatles butcher cover kind of thing?
Yeah, I just checked it on Discogs. A copy of Appetite on vinyl with the original art, median price $230, which is low. Highest $550.
Wow.
Feels low to me. Anyway,
it's not that old, and there's a couple, over 100,000 of them. So
yeah, I guess that's fair. Predictably, retailers refused to stock it, and so the label replaced it with the now iconic Celtic cross, which is a Thin Lizzy reference, and all the little cartoons of the band as skulls. That was originally designed as a tattoo for Axl by an artist named Billy White, and that pencil sketch for that art was sold at a Grammy auction in 2009 for, according to one person, $6,200.
Seems low.
With all that in mind, it is important to note here that Axl's initial idea for the album art was the shot of the Challenger space shuttle exploding that appeared on the cover of Time in February of 1986.
And then Beyonce borrowed the sound of Mission Control announcing the Challenger explosion at the start of her song EXO on her surprise visual album in 2013. You can hear the...
Apparently not the first person to sample that. I was just reading about that after you sent me that link.
Well, still the first person of her notoriety.
Stature.
Yeah. I was never sure what the meaning was behind that, or if she spoke out about that. I think she issued some kind of an apology, but
yeah. Anyway, given its stature at this point, it may surprise you to learn that Appetite didn't really light the world on fire when it was released in July 87. Sold about 200,000 albums in 6 months, which is very respectable, but they just kind of thought it was like, okay, there's your debut album out of the way. Let's, you did your tour. Geffen wanted them off the road and just immediately working on the follow-up. And the band's reputation had started to backfire on them. All these cable companies were putting pressure on MTV to tone down their programming, or they were going to drop MTV from the lineup, and Guns N' Roses were just too scary. And rightfully so. They were monsters.
That kept me from listening to their music for years because I was scared of them as a kid.
And reviews were kind of mixed. They got a Pan and Metal Hammer, and they made the record made 26 in the Village Voice Paz and Jop poll from '88, which is one of the most influential metrics at the time. Is a poll the Voice did of all the top music critics in the country, right?
Yeah, was that a Christgau thing?
I think so. Yeah. So Zutto goes to David Geffen and pressures Geffen in turn to pressure Tom Freston, one of the creators of MTV. The band's manager at the time is a guy named Alan Niven, and he helped. He said, there was an incredibly gorgeous girl who worked with us, and she promised she would dance naked on Freston's desk if they would play the video for Welcome to the Jungle.
God, these people.
I know. The point is that they had shot the video and submitted it to MTV, and MTV was flatly like, no, we will not do this. So Geffen and his wheelin' dealin' manages to eke out the concession that they would play the video once on a Sunday at 2 a.m. Eastern, 5 a.m. Pacific. And Zutto understandably is like, what? That's it? And Geffen said, look, don't be a schmuck. We could have gotten nothing out of that.
I'm kind of surprised Geffen couldn't, step on the throats of these MTV executives a little more at that time. I guess it just goes to show the power of MTV in 1987, 88. You know who directed the video for Welcome to the Jungle?
Who's that?
Nigel Dick, the guy who did Britney Spears' Hit Me Baby One More Time, Oops, I Did It Again, as well as Drops of Jupiter by Train, and It's All Coming Back to Me Now by Celine Dion. That is the common thread.
Do they know it's Christmas?
Yes, that's right. The Band-Aid song. That is the common thread. Nigel Dick doing the videos for all of them.
Wow. He did Def Leppard. I forgot
he was a lot of videos.
Yeah, but he was a rock. Yeah, wow. I was gonna say he was a rock guy, but he was not. He did.
He was an everything guy.
Yeah, Boomtown Rats, Madness, second wave ska band, Madness.
Did he do Our House?
One Better Day.
Oh, I don't know that Madness song.
Nope. Did Tears for Fears, Doctor Hook.
Yeah.
Doctor Hook. Dr. Hook were still a band in the 80s. Wasn't that the band that did I Want to Be on the Cover of Rolling Stone?
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Nigel Dick, everyone. People saw this thing, and the proverbial switchboards lit up with requests. Zutto said they went from 200,000 sales to 1 million practically overnight. And then the Sweet Child of Mine video makes a teen idol out of Rose, which was arguably a bad idea for everyone involved. And we're off to the races. Appetite eventually becomes the 7th best-selling album of all time in the U.S., as well as the best-selling debut album ever. 30 million copies sold worldwide, one of the best-selling records of all time. A tremendous quote from drummer Steven Adler. We became everything we dreamed about, but cooler. Just a tremendous quote. Then he says, except for Aerosmith. I thought Aerosmith was cooler.
I love how much these people who seem to hate most things love Aerosmith.
Love Aerosmith. I just love we became everything we dreamed about, but cooler. And they opened for Aerosmith on a post-Appetite tour, which is hilarious because Tim Collins, Aerosmith's then manager, said, by the end of the tour, Guns N' Roses were huge. They basically exploded. We were all pissed that Rolling Stone showed up to do a story on Aerosmith, but Guns N' Roses ended up on the cover instead.
I guess at the final show of that tour, Aerosmith's road crew dressed in gorilla costumes and messed around on stage when Guns N' Roses did Welcome to the Jungle, which is medium funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, as much as I'm not the world's biggest Aerosmith fan, it sounds like they sort of took like a responsible older brother role on that tour. Aerosmith set ground rules early on for this tour: no drugs in their presence, because they'd been to rehab and could also see Guns N' Roses heading down that same path. They didn't really preach to them because they knew that, these people just had to learn for themselves and make their own mistakes. But Aerosmith did give them t-shirts, look like a tour t-shirt, but instead of tour dates, it listed all the rehab centers they'd been through, which was their sort of not so silent comment.
Yeah, I mean, for me, hell is Steven Tyler and Axl Rose covering American Pie.
And Margaritaville.
Can you imagine those two? No, I've come around on Margaritaville. That song's fine.
Oh, that's good.
Can you imagine Steven Tyler and Axl Rose in the studio together? The most annoying voices in the world.
Have they duetted? They must have duetted at some point on that tour or sometime.
Well,
years
you know
later.
who guested with GNR at one point? Don f***ing Henley, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow, what a trifecta of
Don Henley of
people.
the Eagles played drums for the band during the 1989 AMA, American Music Awards show, while Steven Adler was in rehab. This is because Axl had added vocals to Don Henley's 1980 song, I Will Not Go Quietly, which, of course, you wouldn't. You're Don Henley. Never done anything quietly in your life. Henley was returning the favor, and this, sadly, was on Patience, which is their big acoustic ballad. So, regrettably, he didn't pick up the sticks for something like Welcome to the Jungle or Paradise City, which would have... I would have had a begrudging respect for Don Henley had we done that. Anyway, we've danced around this for long. Let's finally, folks, thanks for hanging with us. We're finally getting to the real meat of the episode, which is the time when GNR has co-starred alongside Jim Carrey and Liam Neeson in the fifth and final Dirty Harry film, The Deadpool, from 1988. Warner Brothers had decided to get some of this this wild heavy metal that the kids are listening to these days to the really a shot in the arm of the old Dirty Harry franchise, now on its fifth legs.
I had no idea that there was more than two.
Yeah. And indeed, Jim Carrey plays a murdered rock star in his first dramatic role. And Liam Neeson
First role period, I would imagine. Because this was before In Living Color, I think.
That's true.
He was in Peggy Sue Got Married?
There you go.
Wow. Okay. That was 85. All right. I stand corrected.
Yeah, and so Guns N' Roses plays a band in there, and they Welcome to the Jungle is a sync in there. They play it, and Slash said in an interview at a time, Eastwood came up to us on the set, and the guy's like 9 feet tall. He's very intimidating. He walked up to us and said, "Great album," shook our hands, and walked off. I didn't really know what to think of it.
Do we think that Clint Eastwood actually listened to Appetite for Destruction? I mean, he was tight with Dennis Hopper after Hang 'em High, after doing Hang 'em High with him.
Yeah.
So maybe he had advanced taste in music.
I just like the idea he plays it, and then he just goes, squints off into the distance. The only scene in which the band appears together in the film is a funeral scene for Carrey's character, and this was because of a very Guns N' Roses reason. Adler, again, the quote machine. When we did this movie, The Deadpool, with Clint Eastwood, the scene in the cemetery, there's 5 of us. It's 2017, he says in an interview. And then the next scene, you see Slash and Izzy and Duff shooting a harpoon through a window of this boat, which is true. Well, the reason me and Axl weren't there was because I met some stripper that night, and she put this brown powder in my beer. And next thing I know, I woke up in a hospital, charcoal coming out of every hole in my body, and Axl was holding my hand crying. Just what a, like a painter with words, he sketches this vignette. Just oozing charcoal from your orifice and a weeping Axl Rose, like the Madonna and Child.
In the Pietà.
In the anyway, Jim Carrey, sidebar on Jim Carrey's love for heavy music. This is such a funny. I did a deep digging in this because I was like, remember Cannibal Corpse is in Ace Ventura when he goes into the metal club. Yeah. So some people are like, oh, Jim Carrey's a big fan of heavy metal. Some people aren't. Apparently, Jim Carrey's son-in-law was in a metal band. But if you go back and look at these interviews, Jim Carrey is on Arsenio talking about Napalm Death, pioneering British death metal grindcore band, Napalm Death.
Friend of the pod,
Napalm Death. He's talked about Pantera before in an interview, and he apparently having Cannibal Corpse in Ace Ventura was he pushed for that. And their drummer, who's a guy named Paul Mazurkiewicz, I think, told Noisy that Carrey came up to them on the set of that movie, and he just started rattling off Cannibal Corpse lyrics, and he was like, I want you to play the song Hammer Smashed Face. And then also recited the lyrics to Rancid Amputation, which was on their previous record. So Jim Carrey, familiar with not one, but 2 Cannibal Corpse albums. And Carrey was in attendance at the GNR reunion in 2016. So Jim Carrey, fan of metal.
My favorite Guns N' Roses in cinema story is when producers for the 2001 movie Black Hawk Down wanted to use Welcome to the Jungle in the soundtrack, but according to Slash, Axl refused unless he could re-record it with the current members of Guns N' Roses so that the classic lineup, who was no longer in the band, would not get the royalties. I don't think it ended up happening.
Yeah, he's a vindictive guy. Oh, man, I got to tell my Buckethead story. Well, it's not my Buckethead story. Did you ever hear about Buckethead in the studio recording Chinese Democracy?
No.
Buckethead, ladies and gentlemen. The incredible...
Making his first appearance.
Making his first...
TMI pod.
Yeah, so Buckethead is probably best known to shredder wonks. He is a tremendously virtuosic guitarist. There's this amazing... He grew up in LA, I think LA, grew up in California. Just a total, like, recluse guitar shut-in. And at some point, he hit up on the idea of wearing this horrifying blank mask with a bucket of KFC chicken empty overturned on his head, hence the nickname Buckethead. And by all accounts, he's this very sweet guy. He's a funny parlor interest for me. I've YouTubed a lot of videos. There's a video of him at like 19 on the back patio of someone's porch, just ripping through all this guitar stuff. He does, I think in the course of 5 minutes, he plays obviously all this metal shredding, but then he does a two-handed tapping version of the Halloween theme song. He plays an incredibly moving composition just called I Love My Parents. And then he does a whole chicken picking segment where he takes the distortion off and just plays this insanely fast Nashville country stuff. There are also videos that you can see of him where he just stops playing music at his concerts to pop and lock on stage with a set of nunchucks. Anyway, Buckethead was brought into the studio to help record guitar parts for Chinese Democracy. And apparently in the studio, I'm just reading about these sessions, Shaq came by at one point. Buckethead requested a chicken coop be built for him in the studio. And here's Tom Zutaut again talking to Classic Rock in 2008. There's a chair in there. There's a rubber chicken hanging from the ceiling and a bunch of body parts. And apparently a lot of porn.
Now, when you say body parts...
Not real body parts. Buckethead's other thing is horror movies. He's like a big horror movie dork. So he would have all these like fake severed limbs and stuff hanging in this human-sized chicken coop inside of a top-of-the-line recording studio. Again, I can't stress that enough. And apparently he was watching hardcore porn DVDs in the coop. I guess he had a monitor or VCR or, laptop or something in there to get inspired. And Axl did not like this. And
shades of his early, very religious upbringing when his stepdad threw the TV out type of not liking this? Or just
perhaps, or maybe just stop.
Or just mad he didn't think of it himself.
Anyway, Axl chews Buckethead out, and Buckethead leaves for days because he just thought he wanted to defend his right to watch porn in a chicken coop. Anyway, Buckethead, ladies and gentlemen. Outro.
I say, and this is where we end our journey with Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, I think I've been listening to these episodes, and I always end these by going, what more is there to say? Because we truly have covered every angle of this, maybe except for the drum sounds, which, sorry, Steven, your quotes are more interesting than your gated snare. Yeah, man, one of the best selling records of all time, one of the greatest dirtbag magnum opuses, or whatever else I said in the fucking intro. I got nothing else. Folks, thank you for listening. This has been Too Much Destruction, Appetite for Information, Axl drafting lawsuits against me as we speak. It's been nice knowing you. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. We'll catch you next time if Axl doesn't stop us first.
Too Much Information was a production of iHeartRadio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The supervising producer is Mike Johns.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.